Judge Reynolds barely notices the subtle shift in the courtroom's atmosphere as Sarah Bennett walks forward. The morning light catches the silver threads in her neat cornrows, and her composed demeanor stands in stark contrast to the nervous energy typical of traffic court defendants. Several regulars in the gallery, lawyers, clerks, and court reporters who've witnessed thousands of cases, pause their usual routines to watch. Sarah reaches into her folder, producing documentation with the methodical precision of someone well-versed in formal procedures. The broken meter incident occurred outside the city's main library, where she had spent 3 hours researching property development regulations. Her car, a modest Honda Civic, had been ticketed despite the meter's display showing an error message. "Your Honor," she begins, her voice carrying a quiet confidence, "I have photos of the meter malfunction, time-stamped receipts from the library's security desk, and—" Judge Reynolds waves his hand dismissively, a gesture he's perfected over 15 years on the bench. The movement sends his sleeve links catching the sunlight, small golden gavels that had been a gift from his equally privileged colleagues at his appointment ceremony. "Ms. Bennett, the city's parking ordinances are quite clear. A non-functioning meter is not an excuse for improper parking." The court clerk, Maria Rodriguez, glances up from her computer, her fingers pausing over the keyboard. In 5 years working with Reynolds, she's never heard this particular interpretation of the ordinance. She knows, as most local legal professionals do, that City Code 7.43 specifically addresses malfunctioning meters as valid grounds for appeal. Sarah maintains her composure, though a slight tightening around her eyes betrays her growing frustration. "Your Honor, if you'll permit me to cite City Code 7.43. "Ms. Bennett," Reynolds interrupts, his tone carrying the weight of authority and something else, a subtle condescension that makes several attorneys in the gallery exchange glances. "This court's time is valuable. The fine is set at $500, plus court costs." Next case. The amount hangs in the air like a thunderclap. Standard parking violations rarely exceed $100, and even with added fees, they typically cap at $150. The gallery's subtle background murmur dies completely, replaced by a thick silence that seems to press against the high courthouse windows. Sarah's hand tightens slightly on her folder, creasing the manila paper. For a moment, something flickers in her eyes. Not anger or defeat, but a calculating assessment that Reynolds completely misses as he's already looking down at his next case file. She slips a business card from her wallet, writes something on the back, and hands it to Maria along with the citation payment form. As Sarah turns to leave, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, Reynolds is already calling the next case. He doesn't notice Maria's raised eyebrows as she reads the business card, nor does he see the knowing look that passes between Sarah and an older security guard by the door, a man who's worked in the building longer than Reynolds has been a judge. Outside the courtroom, the morning sun has climbed higher, turning the courthouse's marble steps into a brilliant white expanse. Sarah pauses at the top, pulling out her phone and dialing a number from memory. "James. Yes, I just left traffic court. Listen, about that lease renewal for the downtown properties. I think we need to schedule that meeting sooner rather than later. Yes, particularly the courthouse building." "No, let's not send the usual representative. I'll handle this one personally." She descends the steps, passing an ornate cornerstone that reads Bennett Properties LLC, established 1983 in small, dignified letters. Inside, Judge Reynolds continues working through his docket, completely unaware that his morning's display of authority has set in motion events that will fundamentally shake his understanding of power, privilege, and presumption. The courthouse cafe buzzes with lunchtime chatter, but today's conversations carry an electric undercurrent. At a corner table, 3 law clerks huddle over their salads, their voices low but animated. Jessica Chen, a first-year clerk for Judge Thompson, leans forward, her fork suspended midair as she recounts what she witnessed in Courtroom 4B. "I've seen Judge Reynolds be strict before, but this was different." she explains to her colleagues. The woman had everything documented: photos, timestamps, even witness statements from library security. I've never seen someone so prepared for a simple parking ticket dispute. Mark Sullivan, a veteran clerk with 5 years' experience, sets down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Reynolds has been different lately, ever since he was passed over for the appellate court position last month. But this morning, he shakes his head. That fine was way out of line with standard procedures. Across the cafe, Maria Rodriguez picks at her lunch, her appetite diminished by the morning's events. She pulls out the business card Sarah Bennett had handed her, studying the elegant letterhead. Sarah Bennett, CEO, Bennett Properties, LLC. On the back, in precise handwriting, is a note. Thank you for your professionalism today. Please keep this card. You never know when new opportunities might arise. Outside in the parking lot, Sarah sits in her Honda Civic, the leather-bound planner open on her lap. She's not writing in it, though. Instead, she's on a conference call with her executive team. The car's interior reflects her methodical nature. Immaculate, organized, with a stack of real estate portfolios in the backseat. Yes, I want full documentation of all our courthouse maintenance requests from the past 5 years. She speaks into her Bluetooth earpiece, particularly anything related to the parking infrastructure. She pauses, listening. No, don't alert the building manager yet. And reschedule my afternoon appointments. I need to make some calls to the city council members about parking meter maintenance protocols. Back inside, the afternoon session is about to begin. 2 public defenders stand near the water fountain, their conversation masked by its gentle splash. Did you see Reynolds this morning? Asks the younger one, straightening his slightly wrinkled tie. I haven't seen him that dismissive since the Williams case last year. His colleague, a woman with gray-streaked hair and decades of experience, sighs deeply. Some judges forget that the robe doesn't make them infallible. But karma has a way of teaching unexpected lessons. In the courthouse's administrative office, Linda Matthews stares at her computer screen, rereading the email from Bennett Properties for the 3rd time. The language is polite but firm. A mandatory lease review meeting, with the owner attending personally. Linda's been handling courthouse administration for 12 years, and something about this feels different. She glances through the glass partition at Judge Reynolds' chambers, where he's preparing for the afternoon session. He's straightening the photographs on his wall, the award ceremonies, charity golf tournaments, all reflecting a life of privilege and authority. Linda contemplates telling him about the subtle undercurrent of tension spreading through the courthouse staff, about the whispers and concerned glances, but she knows he wouldn't listen. Sarah, meanwhile, has moved her impromptu office to the local library, the very place where this all began. She sits at a corner table, surrounded by property documents and legal texts. A young library assistant approaches, recognition flickering across her face. Ms. Bennett, I remember you from this morning. You were using our research section before the parking incident. Would you like me to pull those property development regulations again? Sarah looks up, a small smile playing at her lips. No, thank you. I think I have everything I need now. She turns back to her work, adding another note to her growing list of discussion points for the upcoming lease meeting. The afternoon sun streams through the library's high windows, casting long shadows across her documents, shadows that seem to point like arrows toward the courthouse. Linda's heels echo through the administrative corridor as she hurries toward Judge Reynolds' chambers, the urgent email from Bennett Properties, LLC practically burning in her hand. She pauses briefly to compose herself, smoothing her blazer and taking a deep breath before knocking on the heavy wooden door. Inside, Reynolds lounges in his leather chair, feet propped on his mahogany desk as he scrolls through his phone, checking tea times for the weekend. His half-finished coffee sits precariously close to a stack of case files, steam still rising from the county courthouse logo mug. Come in, he calls out, not bothering to look up. Linda enters, clutching her tablet like a shield. Judge Reynolds, we've received an urgent communication regarding the building lease. Her voice carries an unusual tremor that finally makes him glance up. Bennett Properties wants an immediate meeting to discuss significant amendments. They're sending the owner personally. Reynolds waves his hand dismissively, a gesture eerily similar to his courtroom demeanor. Just another routine negotiation, Linda. These property companies always try to squeeze more money around renewal time. He takes a sip of coffee, grimacing at its temperature. Have Gerald handle it. He's done the last 3 lease renewals. Sir, Linda persists, her knuckles white around the tablet's edges. They've specifically requested your presence. The email mentions concerns about judicial conduct and facility maintenance standards. She places the tablet on his desk, angled so he can read the professionally worded but unmistakably firm message. The judge's expression flickers briefly as he scans the email. His upcoming golf game at the country club suddenly seems less important. Fine, he sighs, reaching for his calendar. Set it up for next week, but make it clear that my court schedule takes precedence. Linda clears her throat softly. They've requested tomorrow morning, sir. 9 a.m. sharp. She watches as Reynolds' carefully maintained facade of indifference cracks slightly. They've also requested all maintenance records for the past 5 years, particularly regarding the parking facilities. Outside the chambers, the afternoon buzz of the courthouse continues unaware. A young intern hurries past, arms full of files, while 2 attorneys discuss their cases in hushed tones near the water cooler. Through the window, Reynolds can see the parking lot where hundreds of citizens come to seek justice or face judgment every day. His phone buzzes with a text from his country club partner. Still on for tomorrow's game. Reynolds stares at it for a long moment before responding. Have to reschedule. Building lease meeting. He doesn't mention the slight unease building in his stomach, the kind he hasn't felt since his first day on the bench. Linda lingers by the door, years of experience telling her there's more to this situation than a simple lease renewal. Sir, there's something else. She begins carefully. The email came from Sarah Bennett's personal account. She's the CEO, and she'll be attending herself. Sarah Bennett. Reynolds repeats the name, tasting it for any familiarity. Finding none, he shrugs. Never heard of her. Probably another corporate shark trying to make a name for herself. He turns back to his phone, clearly dismissing both Linda and the situation. As Linda leaves the chambers, she passes Maria's desk. The court clerk gives her a knowing look. They've both been here long enough to recognize when the winds of change are blowing through their marble halls. Maria's hand unconsciously touches the business card tucked into her desk drawer, the one with the handwritten note that now seems more prophetic than polite. In the parking lot, the late afternoon sun glints off the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the space where Sarah Bennett's Honda Civic had been parked that morning. The broken meter stands silent, its error message still flashing, an unwitting catalyst in a story of power, presumption, and the quiet satisfaction of justice served in unexpected ways. The conference room feels unusually sterile as Judge Reynolds straightens his Brooks Brothers tie for the 3rd time. The morning light streams through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished mahogany table where he's chosen to sit at the head, a habit born from years of courtroom authority. Linda stands near the door, her tablet clutched close, watching the minute hand tick toward 9 o'clock. At precisely 8:59 a.m., voices drift in from the hallway. Reynolds adjusts his posture, preparing to meet this mysterious CEO with the same authoritative presence he brings to his courtroom. The door opens, and his carefully crafted demeanor crumbles like sand. Sarah Bennett strides in, her Bottega Veneta briefcase matching the sophistication of her tailored Channel suit. 2 associates follow, a younger man with a laptop and an older woman carrying a thick portfolio, but Reynolds barely notices them. His eyes are fixed on Sarah's face, recognition hitting him like a physical blow as his mind rockets back to yesterday's traffic court. Good morning, Judge Reynolds. Sarah's voice carries the same quiet confidence it held in court, but now it's backed by an unmistakable air of authority. I believe we met yesterday, though under rather different circumstances. She takes a seat directly opposite him, not at the side as visitors typically would. Linda's sharp intake of breath is the only sound in the room as Sarah's associates arrange their materials. The younger man, James Chen, opens his laptop while the older woman, Patricia Martinez, spreads out architectural drawings of the courthouse building. Ms. Bennett, Reynolds manages, his voice slightly hoarse. I wasn't aware that I owned this building. Sarah completes his thought, her smile professional but carrying an edge. Yes, I gathered that. She pulls out a familiar folder, the same one from traffic court, and removes her parking ticket receipt, placing it carefully beside the lease renewal documents. Patricia begins her presentation about necessary building upgrades, but Reynolds barely hears her. His eyes keep darting between Sarah's composed face and the parking ticket receipt that seems to mock him from the table's polished surface. The previous day's court session plays through his mind, each dismissive gesture and interruption, now feeling like a self-inflicted wound. Our primary concerns, Sarah continues, smoothly taking over from Patricia, include the parking infrastructure, which, as I experienced personally, has some significant issues. She pauses, letting the words settle. We're particularly interested in discussing how the courthouse management handles citizen complaints about facilities. James pulls up a spreadsheet on the conference room's projection screen, displaying years of maintenance requests and complaint statistics. Reynolds' eyes fix on a particular data point. Dozens of reported issues with the same parking meter that had led to Sarah's ticket. Of course, Sarah adds, her tone measured, we're also interested in ensuring that the courthouse provides an environment conducive to fair and unbiased administration of justice. Her emphasis on these last words is subtle but unmistakable. Linda watches the color drain from Reynolds' face as Sarah methodically outlines proposed changes to the lease agreement. The terms aren't unreasonable, but they come with strict compliance requirements regarding facility maintenance and accessibility. Each point feels like a carefully aimed arrow, precision guided by yesterday's encounter. The meeting continues, professional and productive on the surface, but charged with unspoken tension. Reynolds, usually dominant in any room he occupies, finds himself increasingly silent, responding with short nods and one-word answers. His authority, so absolute in his courtroom, seems to have evaporated in the face of Sarah's quiet competence and the irrefutable evidence of his own prejudgment. As the morning sun climbs higher, casting stark shadows across the conference room table, Judge Marcus Reynolds experiences something rare in his 15 years on the bench: the uncomfortable sensation of being judged himself and finding his own conduct wanting. The lease negotiation unfolds like a masterfully orchestrated symphony, with Sarah Bennett as its composed conductor. Each document she presents carries the weight of meticulous preparation. Market analysis reports detail the rising property values in the downtown district, while facility assessment photos highlight the courthouse's aging infrastructure, particularly its problematic parking systems. Reynolds shifts uncomfortably in his high-backed leather chair as Sarah references a specific clause in the original lease agreement. Section 7.4.3, she notes, the same code section she'd attempted to cite in traffic court, specifically addresses the maintenance responsibilities for parking facilities. Her voice remains professionally neutral, but the parallel isn't lost on anyone in the room. James Chen, Sarah's younger associate, smoothly transitions through presentation slides showing comparable properties in the area. Bennett Properties maintains 14 similar buildings in the downtown corridor, he explains, all with significantly lower maintenance complaint rates. His keyboard clicks as he pulls up a graph, its red line showing the courthouse's steadily rising number of facility issues. Patricia Martinez, the older associate, spreads out architectural renderings of proposed improvements. Her experienced hands trace potential upgrade paths along the blueprints, but her eyes occasionally drift to Reynolds, noting how the usually dominant judge seems to shrink with each passing minute. Of course, Sarah continues, her fingers lightly touching the parking ticket receipt that remains visible on the table. We understand that managing a courthouse presents unique challenges. The daily influx of citizens, many experiencing stressful situations, requires particular attention to accessibility and fairness. Linda, still standing near the door, notices how Reynolds' jaw tightens at the word fairness. The administrator has witnessed countless meetings in this room, but never one where the power dynamic has shifted so dramatically. The judge's usual commanding presence has wilted under the steady pressure of Sarah's professional expertise and unspoken reproach. "We're proposing a comprehensive renovation of the parking infrastructure," Sarah explains, sliding forward a detailed proposal, including the installation of modern meters with real-time monitoring capabilities and multiple payment options. She pauses, allowing the irony to settle. This should significantly reduce the occurrence of technical malfunctions. Reynolds reaches for his water glass, his hand barely trembling as he takes a sip. The morning sun has shifted, now casting harsh light across the conference table, illuminating the stark contrast between his previous day's arrogance and his current discomfort. Patricia presents the proposed lease terms, each point carefully crafted to ensure accountability. "We're including specific provisions for regular facility assessments," she notes, with particular emphasis on ensuring equal access and functionality for all courthouse visitors. James updates his spreadsheet in real time, adjusting figures as the discussion progresses. The soft tapping of his keyboard provides a steady backdrop to Sarah's measured presentation. He exchanges occasional glances with Patricia, both noting their CEO's masterful handling of the situation. Additionally, Sarah adds, her voice carrying just a hint of emphasis, "We're implementing a new system for handling visitor complaints about facility issues. All reports will be documented and addressed within 24 hours. The parallel to standard court response times hangs in the air, unspoken but clear. As the meeting draws to a close, Sarah collects her documents with practiced efficiency. The parking ticket receipt disappears back into her folder, its message delivered. Reynolds sits in uncharacteristic silence, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by a growing recognition of his miscalculation. Linda steps forward to gather the signed preliminary agreements, her years of administrative experience allowing her to maintain a professional demeanor despite the charged atmosphere. As Sarah's team packs up their materials, the morning's power shift feels complete, a quiet revolution executed through real estate clauses and facility management terms. In the courthouse beyond the conference room, daily activities continue as usual, unaware that within these walls, justice has been served in its own peculiar way, administered not through a gavel's bang, but through the precise language of property law and the quiet authority of unexpected power. The study in Reynolds' colonial-style home has always been his sanctuary, but tonight its familiar comfort eludes him. The antique grandfather clock in the corner ticks accusingly through the silence, marking each moment of his sleepless contemplation. His untouched glass of Macallan 18 catches the warm lamplight, amber liquid reflecting his troubled expression. He moves to his leather chair, the same one where he spent countless evenings reviewing cases, but tonight he can't settle. The day's events play on endless loop in his mind. Sarah Bennett's composed presence in the conference room, the parking ticket receipt placed with surgical precision beside the lease documents, her articulate presentation laying bare not just the building's failings, but his own. Running his fingers through his graying hair, Reynolds stands again, drawn to the window. His reflection stares back at him, superimposed over the manicured lawn below. In the ghostly glass, he sees himself as others must have seen him yesterday, imperious, dismissive, wielding his authority like a shield against anything that challenged his worldview. He pulls up the court transcript on his tablet, each word now carrying new weight. "The court's time is valuable," he had declared. Reynolds winces at the memory, hearing the condescension in his voice that he'd been too arrogant to recognize in the moment. His thumb hovers over the screen, scrolling through his interruptions of Sarah's attempts to explain, each one now feeling like a self-inflicted wound. From the doorway, his wife Catherine watches silently. After 30 years of marriage, she recognizes the signs of her husband in crisis. "Marcus," she finally speaks, her voice gentle but firm. "You haven't touched your drink, and you've been pacing for hours. What happened today?" Reynolds turns, meeting his wife's concerned gaze. Catherine's work as a civil rights attorney has always made their dinner conversations interesting, but tonight he struggles to find the words. "I made assumptions, Kate," he finally admits, his voice rough. "The kind of assumptions we've argued about for years. The kind I've always insisted I was above making." Moving to his desk, he pulls up the courthouse security footage from yesterday's session. Catherine joins him, watching as the scene unfolds. Her sharp intake of breath at his dismissive treatment of Sarah tells him everything he needs to know about his conduct. "The woman I treated so dismissively," he continues, "owns the courthouse building. But that's not even the point, is it?" He looks at his wife, seeing in her eyes the understanding he's only now reaching himself. "I would have been just as wrong if she'd been anyone else." Catherine settles into the chair opposite his desk, her silence more eloquent than words. She's waited years for this moment of recognition from her husband, though she never imagined it would come quite this way. The grandfather clock chimes midnight, its sound echoing through the quiet house. Reynolds picks up his untouched scotch, studying the play of light through the crystal tumbler. "You know what really gets me, Kate? When she presented those lease terms today, she was completely professional. She had every right to be angry, to be vindictive, but instead she was magnificent. Every proposal was reasonable, every point valid." Standing again, Reynolds moves to the wall where his judicial commission hangs, its ornate frame suddenly seeming pretentious rather than prestigious. 15 years on the bench," he murmurs, "and it took today to show me how far I still have to go." Catherine rises, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Recognition is the first step," she says softly. "The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" Reynolds turns from the commission to his desk, pulling out a legal pad. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by the trappings of his privilege, he begins to write. The first words on the page read, "Request for personal meeting. Sarah Bennett." Below that, he starts listing every assumption, every bias, every moment of prejudice he can identify from yesterday's court session. The untouched scotch sits forgotten as the night deepens, witnessing a judge finally subjecting himself to the same scrutiny he's long applied to others. The local coffee shop, Cornerstone Cafe, bustles with its usual morning crowd, but the corner booth feels like an island of tense anticipation. Judge Reynolds arrived 15 minutes early, his judicial confidence replaced by an unfamiliar nervousness. He's chosen this neutral ground carefully, away from the courthouse's power dynamics and his chamber's authority. Sarah arrives precisely on time, navigating between crowded tables with the same grace she showed in the conference room. She's dressed more casually today in a cream turtleneck and tailored slacks, but her presence still commands attention. Reynolds stands awkwardly as she approaches, his practiced courtroom manners feeling insufficient. "Thank you for meeting me, Miss Bennett," he begins, gesturing to the waiting chair. A barista appears with their pre-ordered drinks, his usual black coffee and the chai latte Sarah requested. The steam rises between them like a fragile barrier. "Sarah, please," she responds, settling into her seat. The morning light through the cafe's windows catches the subtle gray at her temples, earned through years of building her company in a world that often underestimated her. Reynolds takes a deep breath, his fingers tracing the coffee cup's rim. "I've spent the last day examining my behavior in court, and I owe you more than an apology. I demonstrated exactly the kind of bias I've lectured others about avoiding." Sarah watches him over her chai, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Judge Reynolds, that parking ticket wasn't my first experience with judicial prejudice." She reaches into her bag, withdrawing a small photo. "This was taken 20 years ago, when I bought my first commercial property." The photograph shows a younger Sarah standing proudly before a small office building, her realtor's license newly minted. "The seller tried to back out when he met me in person," she continues. "It took 3 court appearances before a judge would even fully review the contract terms." Reynolds stares at the photo, seeing the determination in young Sarah's eyes. "How did you maintain such composure in my courtroom, knowing you owned the building?" A slight smile crosses Sarah's face. "The same way I've handled every obstacle, by letting my competence speak louder than their prejudice." She takes a sip of chai before continuing. "Though I admit, the Lee's meeting was particularly satisfying to prepare for." The morning crowd ebbs and flows around their booth as Reynolds shares his own journey of realization. He tells her about his sleepless night, his wife's patient wisdom, and the uncomfortable excavation of his own biases. Sarah listens intently, occasionally offering perspectives from her decades navigating similar prejudices in the real estate world. The hardest part, Reynolds admits, his coffee growing cold, is recognizing how many others might have faced similar treatment in my courtroom. One moment of clarity doesn't erase years of potential bias. Sarah leans forward, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "Recognition is essential, but it's what you do next that matters. Every property I've acquired, every deal I've closed, has been an opportunity to challenge assumptions. Your courtroom can be the same." The conversation shifts to concrete actions. Sarah shares stories of implementing diversity initiatives in her company, while Reynolds discusses potential changes to courthouse procedures. Their discussion draws from both their professional expertise and personal experiences, creating a blueprint for meaningful change. As the morning wears on, their dialogue evolves from apology to collaboration. They discuss establishing a legal mentorship program, focusing on supporting underrepresented groups in the legal profession. Reynolds shares his vision for mandatory bias training for court staff, while Sarah offers insights from her corporate diversity programs. "You know," Sarah remarks as their meeting draws to a close, "that broken parking meter turned out to be quite catalyst for change." She gathers her belongings, pausing to meet Reynolds' gaze. "The question is, are you ready to be part of that change?" Reynolds stands, extending his hand with genuine respect rather than courtroom formality. "I am," he responds, "and I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a very important conversation." The morning sun streams through the cafe windows, illuminating two people who entered as adversaries, but leave as cautious allies in the ongoing journey toward justice and understanding. 6 months later, Courtroom 4B has transformed in subtle but significant ways. The morning sunlight still streams through the grand windows, but it now illuminates a more diverse array of legal aid volunteers stationed at a new help desk. Judge Reynolds adjusts his robe, no longer as a symbol of authority, but as a reminder of responsibility. The weekly docket moves smoothly, each case receiving thorough consideration. When an elderly Vietnamese man approaches with a traffic violation, Reynolds listens patiently as a court-provided interpreter helps convey the man's explanation. The judge's questions are thoughtful, his ruling balanced. In the gallery, a young law student takes notes for the new court observation program. During the lunch recess, the courthouse's largest conference room hosts a mentorship meeting. Sarah Bennett stands at the podium, addressing a group of aspiring lawyers from underrepresented communities. Her company's legal fellowship program, launched in partnership with Reynolds, has already placed 15 interns in local firms. Success in law, like in real estate, Sarah explains to the attentive audience, isn't just about knowing the rules. It's about understanding how to navigate a system that wasn't originally built for everyone. She gestures to Reynolds, who sits among the attendees rather than at the head table. Sometimes, change comes from unexpected moments of clarity. After the session, Reynolds meets with his newly formed Bias Awareness Committee. The group includes Maria Rodriguez, now promoted to Senior Court Administrator, and several public defenders. They review court statistics, noting a measurable decrease in disparity among sentencing recommendations across demographic groups. Linda Matthews arrives with the latest building maintenance report. The new parking system, installed under Sarah's lease requirements, has eliminated most ticket disputes. More importantly, the courthouse's improved accessibility and multilingual signage have made justice more approachable for all community members. Later that afternoon, Reynolds presides over a special session of traffic court. Instead of rushing through cases, he implements the new procedures developed with Sarah's input. Each defendant receives a clear explanation of their rights in their preferred language. The gallery includes law students observing the reformed process as part of their practical education. Sarah occasionally visits, not as a property owner, but as a guest speaker for the legal education program. Her story of the parking ticket incident has become a powerful teaching tool, illustrating how privilege and prejudice can intersect with justice. The broken meter that sparked their confrontation is now displayed in the courthouse's new educational exhibit about bias in the legal system. In his chambers, Reynolds keeps a small framed photo on his desk. It shows him and Sarah at the opening of the courthouse's new legal resource center, both smiling as they cut the ribbon. Next to it sits a copy of the original parking ticket, serving as a daily reminder of how one moment of prejudice led to lasting change. The local legal community has noticed the transformation. Other judges have begun implementing similar reforms in their courtrooms, creating a ripple effect throughout the district. The State Bar Association recently invited both Reynolds and Sarah to speak at their annual conference about institutional bias and practical solutions. As the day winds down, Reynolds walks through the courthouse lobby, now adorned with artwork from local artists of diverse backgrounds. He pauses at the building's cornerstone, the Bennett Properties inscription, no longer a source of discomfort, but a symbol of unexpected transformation. Outside, the setting sun casts long shadows across the courthouse steps. A young black law student descends, carefully carrying the new acceptance letter to the mentorship program. She passes Sarah's car, no longer the modest Honda, but still parked in the same spot that sparked this journey of change. Reynolds stands at his chamber window, watching the daily parade of justice seekers leaving the building. Each face represents a story, a struggle, a hope for fair treatment. The broken meter incident could have remained just another example of bias in the system. Instead, it became a catalyst for reform, proving that justice, like change, often arrives in unexpected packages. In the end, the story of the white judge and the black property owner became not just a tale of comeuppance, but a testament to how confronting bias can transform not just individuals, but entire institutions. The courthouse stands as it always has, but its halls now echo with a newer, more inclusive definition of justice.